Good evening, everyone. I'm Yvonne Opebiyi, and I'm originally from the Caribbean, but I've lived in Africa, in Nigeria. I've lived in the USA, and I've lived in England. I've studied in England. I've worked in Nigeria. I was married to a Nigerian. All my children are Nigerian. They grew up in Nigeria. So I'm fully Nigerian myself. I've lived in America. I worked in America as a nurse. I was a nurse supervisor for the veterans nursing home for quite a few years. So and then here I am, as I said, back in England. So I do know what it is like to be Black in all the major collection of Black people around the world. And as I've said, the only place I haven't been is Brazil. And Brazil is the second largest collection of African descendants outside of Nigeria. So Nigeria is the most populous Black country, followed by Brazil. I haven't been to Brazil. And I have titled this talk, the challenges that we have to overcome. And I chose this imagery over here because I feel that the challenges that we as a people have are as impossible as this ball trying to stay static on a triangle that is tipped precariously on one side. There's no way that this ball is going to stay there and not roll off. And even if you try to settle it, put it on its base, the ball is still going to roll off. And I think that as a people, that's just how our situation is. Any way you look at it, it's going to be difficult, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible. And that's what I want us to look at this evening, to look at the possibilities, to look at overcoming hurdles, because we are quite capable of doing that. And yeah, I've got some facts and figures here. I just chose them randomly, but they bring out some of the points I'd like to make. For example, it costs £37,543 in 2016-2017 here in England to keep one prisoner in jail. And when I saw this number, I just thought to myself that if we had invested this amount of money into the life of a young Black person, the tremendous difference it would make, rather than spending this amount just to keep someone in prison. Martin Luther King Jr. had said that the mind is a terrible thing to waste, and putting a young person, regardless of color, Black or white, in prison is a terrible waste of a mind and of a life. So just think of this cost and think of how much better it would be if we could keep our young Black people out of jail and invest this money into their future. And the disturbing fact is that 2 out of every 3 male offenders reoffend within 2 years of leaving jail. And the majority of Black people who are in prison are men. So does it mean that for every 3 male that is in prison, 2 of them are going to bounce back into prison in 2 years' time? So where's the future of our young people? And the majority of the people who are in prison are at that age where it is their most productive period of life. This is the time of life that they should be making a career, creating a family, creating a career. This is their most productive years, and these years are being wasted in jail. It takes 11 billion per year to, spent on reoffenders. And then I've got some random facts that I got at a police meeting that Mark Una and myself attended. And it's quite disturbing because it says here, age 16 to 24, the murder rate for Black victims is 24 times higher than that of white. So here again, it's our young men, 16 to 24, if they're being murdered, if they're being killed at 24 times higher than white, then what are we looking at? It's a serious depletion of, valuable young Black men. Black murder victim rate is 200 to 800% higher than the white rate. And I did ask at that meeting what criteria they're using to determine these facts, because they look almost impossible. But that's what we are looking at. Another thing I would like to point out is that when it comes to education, 3.5% of our African Caribbean children are leaving school with 3 A levels. And that same statistic shows that 24% of Chinese are graduating. So the Chinese are at 24%, and the African Caribbean is at 3%. Of course, the Chinese are at the top when I looked at that graph, and we were at the bottom. And that's just not good enough. And the disparity in that we're less than 1% of the total population in England based on the 2011 census. It's amazing, but we are not very many. We are not up to 1 million in 2011. There is not up to 1 million African Caribbean people in England and Wales. And yet we represent 5% of the prison population. That's a disturbing fact. That's a very disturbing fact. So having looked at these statistics, I'm going to go on to some of the effects of slavery and colonization, because I do believe that slavery and colonization has impacted significantly those statistics that I've just gone over. When they took us out of Africa and took us to the West Indies, we suffered loss of language. Our language was taken away from us. We could no longer communicate with each other in our native language so that we could feel part of a group or part of a whole. And a language creates identity. I'm sure most of us here have traveled. And if you're in a foreign country, that does not speak English, and you hear one English speaking person, automatically you look across to that person, and chances are you'll go over and bond with that person. Hello, I'm so, and you'll start because of that bond of language. And we've lost that. We've lost our customs. We no longer, the customs that, we have in Africa, especially as it concerns family life and the dignity that is given to the family, members of the family, that was taken away from us, or at least they attempted to take it away from us. It changed significantly, but somehow we still managed to hold on to that sense of family unity and family value and the closeness of a family, because for support, because it has now been established that your support system significantly affects the outcome of whatever it is that you're doing in life. It significantly affects your progress. And if you're unwell, or if there are adverse effects, your support system does make a difference as to what your success rate is going to be. And we've got loss of our known self. We no longer know who we are because that was taken away. It was total annihilation of anything to do with Africa. So we no longer know who we are. And then because of that, it was a systematic system to change us from who we were into what they wanted us to be. And that has left us with a struggle with ourselves as inferior to others, because that's what we were told. That's what we were told. And I'll bring the example of, there's a word, a Yoruba word, and it's, if there are any Jamaicans listening, it's mami. And mami is still being used in Nigeria among the Yoruba people. It means my mother. And children are still calling their parents, their mothers, mommy. And it is even a sense, a term of endearment, because if you really want to get something from your mother, you want to soften her up and sweet her up, it's like, mommy, and then you start petitioning her for whatever you want. And yet in Jamaica, it's a derogatory term to describe someone's mother. You would never call your own mother mommy, because it's a derogatory term. If you want to say to someone that, I don't value your mother, like for example, you'd say, go away, go to your mommy. Is not a term of endearment. It's not a term of dignity or anything. And I just used that one single word. When I went to Nigeria and I heard people saying, mommy, and recognizing the value of that word, I realized how much had been taken away from us, because everything that was good that we had was demoralized, destroyed, relegated to being the worst of everything. And so we have lost that pride, and whatever we have left, we don't value it because we see it as inferior. And so we struggle with inferiority. And yet we are resistant to that concept, because deep within ourselves, we know we are far more valuable than what they've told us that we are. And there's also, based on that, a loss of status for both genders, for men and for women. The African man, and when I say the African man, I can only speak for Nigeria, but for all the African men that I know, if you want to find dignity, you need to go to an African village and see the dignity that an African man, especially an older man, when he becomes like the head of a community, the dignity that he maintains. And that has been taken away from our men. And I think as a group of people, we need to reinstate our men where they belong, which is in a position of proud dignity. We need to give our men back that sense of pride, that sense of dignity. And I'll just quickly explain something here, because, they try to tell us that, we're of no worth, no moral values. And yet that is not true. That is not true, because I know that in Nigeria, there is my husband was a Yoruba person. There are various tribes. Anybody who knows of Africa know that we have different tribes. But in the Yoruba tribe, different demarcations, and there's a town in Nigeria called Ondo, and the people from Ondo State, they are well known to be highly educated, highly progressive people, very proud people. And in their way of life, their system, because back in the days, integrity was everything. Because, for example, if you want to have a daughter married, you cannot just go to someone's house and say, oh, I've seen this young lady and I'd like to marry her. It's a process. And before you can marry someone's daughter, that family, once you've indicated your intention, that family is going to investigate you for about a year. Your family is going to be under some serious investigation to see if you're worthy of their daughter. Consequently, most families behave with such integrity. Their behavior is above board. If you want to sit at the village gate And if there anyone here that is biblical, you'll know how many times the Bible in the Old Testament will mention that they met at the gate, the gate of the city. In Africa, in Nigeria, you cannot sit at the gate with the other men if you're a thief, or if there's any effect on your integrity. You're not allowed in that proud community sitting at the gate to make decisions for the community. So we've got our system, which is a very proud system of how we rule ourselves, how we see ourselves, and that we have lost. We have lost that sense of that status, especially our men. And as I mentioned about the men from Ondo, their sense of integrity is such that if their integrity has been taken away or becomes compromised, it's the traditional thing for that man who's lost integrity. He would rather take his own life than live without integrity. And yet they try to tell us that we're a people of no worth. This is not true. This is just not so. Our women is the same thing happened to our men. We taken us to this side of the world. We lost all respect from everyone. Our own men are now calling us baby mothers. What is baby mother? It's a term that I absolutely detest. Because to me, a baby mother means here is a person who had a child for me. It does not even show that there was a relationship. If you say this is my ex-girlfriend or my ex-wife or my ex-whatever, it gives that person a little bit of status. At least she meant something in your life at one point in time. But a baby mother, she's just there as a machine to produce a child for you. I think it's a that as a people we need to stop using. Another thing is that, they make songs and, they refer to our women, that B word. I don't think that a man should be calling his girlfriend or his partner a B. Because if she's a bee, then what are you? You're a dog. I know that they refer to themselves as dogs, but why are we using these derogatory terms for ourselves, especially for our women? And the woman is the person in every community that maintains the dignity of that race. Why are we relegating our women to the status of bees? The African woman is worth so much more than that. We should not tolerate it. It is something that we should seriously stand up and put an end to. Let us put our men and our women back to the position that they originally had. And for education, as we know, it was a deliberate policy back in the days of slavery to prevent the slaves from reading. It was a punishable offense for any slave to be able to read. And if he was caught, he would be punished. He would be punished. So if you can imagine that we've got a deficit of 300 years of being uneducated, while other tribes and nations and people were moving forward scientifically in every aspect you can think of. Our people were deliberately held back from education, and they were punished if they even attempted to learn something. And we are still suffering the deficit of that until now. And that has brought us anger and frustration to our young people. I don't understand why they're angry or why they're frustrated, but these are all the influences, all the factors that are making our young people so angry. And then they start doing things they should not do, and they end up in prison, wasting a life. The mind is a terrible thing to waste. I had chosen this imagery as the effect of slavery and colonization, because when I looked at it, to me, it represented what we are as a people. We've been disembodied. Our head and our body, we've been disconnected from who we really are. We're just a body without a head, or we're a head without a body. And we need to reconnect. That reconnect needs to be made so that we can become whole once again. And this little friend of mine here, I personally, a lot of times feel like this, just frozen from the negative spin off of slavery. It's like so much has happened. Where am I? Sorry. What do I do? Where do I go? There's so, we're just staring into the future and into our situations, caught in that trap of negative spin off. Where do I go? What do I do now? How do I make it right? And this negative spin off, is this, I've mentioned it before, derision of self as taught by the persons in power. We're just frozen. Am I really that inferior person that they tell me that I am? I don't think so. I know I'm different. I'm frozen. I don't know where to go. I need to get out of this sense of feeling inferior. I need to do something because I know I can do something. And then we are frozen. So we have this apparent reluctance to try to do anything because we've been told, no, we're just not good for anything. And so we take it on board, even though we resent it and we know it's not true, but it creates a reluctance to even try. We know that we're not going to get anywhere, and it's just, what's the point? So there's a collective futility among our people, and it's being passed on to our young people, and that is something we need to stop again. That is something we need to look at, something we need to address. And what is our relationship with education? We were never allowed to be educated. And once slavery was over, and here is the thing, when we had emancipation in 1838, when we were finally freed. Now, if you remember, if you go back into history, in 1833, the Act for the Abolition of Slavery was passed in the British Parliament, and in August of 1834, slavery was officially ended, but slavery was converted into what they call the apprenticeship system. And in that apprenticeship system, the slave, even though he was free, continued to work for an extra 4 years without being paid 40 hours per week. He was mandated to work hours for free without pay for his former master, even though he was a free person. And at the end of the apprenticeship period, we were turned loose. We had no money, we had no house, we had no land, and more importantly, we had no education. Now, how do you make informed decisions within a society, within a community, within a country, if you can't read or write and you don't understand what is going on? How do you make decisions that will create progress in your life? So, our relationship with education is very unsettled. So we had to go out, we had to work, we had to find whatever we could do to make progress. And education was the last thing on our list. And even now, we are still pushing that agenda of, I have to do well, I have to make money, I have to get a house, I have to do this, I have to do that. And, education is not at the top priority for most of our people. For 400, 300 years plus, it was held back from us. So now we are still struggling and trying to make progress without it. And that is not saying we haven't got educated people or that we don't regard education. This is just giving us an insight into why some of our young people are not reaching the standards that they're supposed to reach. We need to change this. All of these things I'm saying is not to cause depression, is not to cause anger. It is to enlighten, to show us where we are and why we are in this situation, and to make a determined effort to do something about it for the sake of our young people. And then I've said that this is the assumed community needs. I put assumed here because these are the things that we can come up with to say these are the things that we need. I haven't done a survey or a research into it, but just living as a Black person, I know that some of the our needs is a sense of self. We need to find a sense of self. We are disembodied, we are misplaced. And I just quickly say, if we think of it that we were taken from Africa, taken to the Caribbean or to America or to Brazil, and we were enslaved. And that's another thing we need to teach our young people. We are not slaves. Slavery did not start in Africa, and it did not start with the African, and it certainly did not start in the Caribbean and America. Slavery is something that goes as far back as Mesopotamian times. But this sense of us being slaves and being of no worth because we have been enslaved, it's a concept that we need to get rid of. It's a concept that we need to get rid of. And this, how our history is based on slavery. We need to remember that we are not slaves. We were never the original slaves. We were a people that had been enslaved, brought to a country that we did not know, taken away from all that we knew, and then getting to that place, we had to work enforced labor, very difficult conditions. When slavery was over, every opportunity that this post-slave, the ex-slave had to make life better for himself, if it meant going to another country, he would go. And the backlash of that is that as a people, we're very mobile, we're almost nomadic. We keep moving from country to country to country, trying to find something better for ourselves and our children. And the effect of that is that there's a sense of disconnect. There's a sense of disconnect. We are still trying to find out who we are, but we haven't settled in one place long enough to create who we really are. And that is something that has to be, a process that is in motion. There's a disconnect with our sense of race and our sense of history. And the negative narrative that we keep hearing from others. And here I'm going to read from a book that I have. It's this book is by Edward Long, and it's the history of Jamaica. And some of the things that Edward Long, and now this is why our people think of themselves the way they do, and why the other races think of us the way that they do. This book was written in 1774 by Edward Long, who was an English person born in Jamaica. And his father was a member of the then Jamaican House of Parliament, which of course was all white. His father's name was Samuel Long, and he is recorded as making some of the most draconian laws regarding the suppression of slaves that that could ever be imagined. And Edward Long, who has written this book, I'm going to read some of the things he has said about us as Black people and why we are of no worth. In his chapter, and he calls it the chapter on Negroes, one of the things that he says here is that, I'll just read the things that he doesn't like about Negroes. Yet the blacks born here to the third and fourth generation, not at all different in color from those Negroes who are brought directly from Africa. Whence it may be concluded very properly that the Negroes or their posterity do not change color, though they continue ever so long in a cold climate. That was his first thing against us, that he said he didn't like us because of that. We wouldn't change color because we're in a different climate. And then he says, secondly, and this one really, this is for another discussion entirely. Secondly, a covering of wool like the bestial fleece instead of hair. And we begin to understand why we have such problems with our hair. Our hair has been described as the bestial fleece of an animal. And then he goes on to say that when we reflect on the nature of these men, that's the African, and their dissimilarity to the rest of mankind, must we not conclude that they are different, that there are different species of the same genus of other animals? And this is what he's saying, that there's a dissimilarity to the rest of mankind. We are not similar to the rest of mankind. And this is what has been passed on from generation to generation among the European people, that we as a people, the Negroes from Africa, are bestial in their very nature, in their very character. And these are some of the things that we have to overcome. And these are some of the things that we need to know. We need to know where these ideologies are coming from. And there's so much more in this book, but there's just not enough time to go over it. So we need to change the narrative, and we can change the narrative if we know what the narrative is. And then we need to accept the possibility that there is change, because we can change and we will change. We just need to be determined enough. And that is why I chose this picture. I just love it. This mama elephant. Try and take her baby elephant from her. And that's just how I see us as a people, especially our women. We are so solid, we are so strong, we are so dependable, and we are so protective of our young and of our community. And that is one thing they haven't been able to destroy in us, our strength and our resilience. And based on that strength, based on that resilience, we will have the acceptance of the possibility of change. And as changing the narrative, some of the ways, I love this one. I use this one deliberately. Everybody knows the story of Oliver, poor little Oliver, going up there asking for more. And just look at this face of this man. More? You would dare to ask for more? Yes. As a people, we dare to ask for more. And we will get more, because we will not give up until we get more. How do we get that more? How do we change the narrative? We need to get more educated. We need to increase that 3.5 young people leaving school with A levels so that they can make it better for themselves. If the Chinese can have 24%, why are we at 3.5? Why are we at 3.5? Surely we can do better than that. We need to bring young people to the point that they can stand equally with every other race and not see themselves differently. But in order to do that, we need to see ourselves from a different angle. We need to re-examine ourselves. We need to understand why we think the way we think, why others think the way they think, based on people like Edward Long and the things that he had said. They're such horrific things in this book that was actually published in 1774 that people took on board, and we are still suffering these ideologies until now. So we need to address the identity problem. We really need to address the identity problem that we are suffering from. We need to know who we are. We need to go back and get back to who we are. And we need to reach the young people where they are. We need to understand them. We need to educate them as to our history, our recent history, because in the Caribbean islands, there's hardly an island that has not got a hero who refused to bend to the system of slavery. I know in Jamaica we've got several. We've got Sammy Sharp. He had the Christmas Revolution, and that was in 1831, where Samuel Sharp could read, and he recognized what was going on in England. So he could teach his people, he could talk to his people on an informed basis as to what was happening and what was coming out, because he could read the newspapers and he knew slavery was going to be abolished soon. And based on that, he had, like you'd call, what was we'd call a sit-in. And that sit-in turned violent and got out of control. Samuel Sharp was caught, tried, killed. He was in March 1832. Yeah, he was hung. But based on that, the missionaries in England, the missionaries in the Caribbean, with the respect that they had for Samuel Sharp, even though he was a slave, his dignity goes back again to the dignity of the Black man. Even though he was a slave, the dignity he had impressed the foreign missionaries so much so that they redoubled their efforts to reach the lobbyists in Parliament to end slavery. And in 1834, slavery, 1833, the act was passed for the abolition of slavery. So Samuel Sharp died 32. Slavery was abolished 33. Not that it happened in 1 year. It actually took William Wilberforce and all the missionaries in the Caribbean islands and all the other people in England 44 years. It took William Wilberforce in his career as a member of parliament to get that bill passed. But when things like the resistance among the slaves happened, it sped up the purpose, the speed at which these things were happening. When they killed Samuel Sharp, it was like, okay, enough. This slavery needs to end. Let us make an act in Parliament and do it. So the efforts of our heroes did not go unnoticed. And every island, Fenton in Grenada, I think in Barbados they had Barbuda or something. He was a slave that was brought directly from Africa, and when he saw what his people were undergoing, he revolted very successfully for 3 years. Of course, he was killed. The people kept rioting, but they didn't have the weaponry, they didn't have the formation. Of course, they were squashed and quenched. But we never gave up. We never gave up until we got our freedom. And our young people need to know this. Our young people need to know this. There's the case in St. Vincent of a lady called Rebecca, because during the apprenticeship system, the slave owners, remember now, during the apprenticeship system, you're a freed slave, but you're working for your master 40 hours a week without being paid for that 40 hours. If you worked over 40 hours, then you could start getting paid once you do your 40 hours. So there's just not enough time to go into all of that. But in St. Vincent, they wanted the slaves now who were working for free, not being paid, to go out into the sugarcane field at 4 a.m. in the morning to start working without pay, even though they were freed slaves. And the men objected. And one man was, I think, put in prison for a week. So the women came out, and there was one particular woman called Rebecca, and the chant was 6 to 6, meaning that we're not going to the field at 4 o'clock, we're not starting until 6. And they kept chanting and protesting 6 to 6, 6 to 6. And it was so much so that they told the women that if they didn't stop the chanting, they were going to be punished. They could not keep Rebecca quiet. She kept shouting and she kept leading the women 6 to 6. Eventually, long story short, Rebecca was caught. Rebecca was punished. She was put on the treadmill for 1 week. 1 week, this poor woman was on the treadmill, still shouting. Well, I don't know if she was still shouting 6 to 6, but she could not be silenced. 6 to 6, she wanted justice. And in St. Vincent, they did a remarkable job as ex-slaves in getting where they are. You know, there's just so much of beauty in our history when we go into all the different islands to see what our people have done. And the dignity they had, the resilience they had, the resourcefulness that they had, that has brought us to where we are as a Caribbean people. We cannot let that go unfulfilled. The desire of those people, what they sacrificed, we should make use of it. We should not allow it to die, just like that. So we need to reach the young people where they are with our positive history and the benefits of changing the narrative. If our children stay in school, they'll be better educated, they'll have a better financial future, better social future. I mean, that goes without saying. They need to start accepting themselves, accepting how wonderful they are. Because as I said, there's so much for us to be proud of. There's so much for us to tell our young people. There's so much for us to pass on. We need to end this disconnect. We need to get the young people to come together and to understand who they are, where they're coming from, and why we are where we are. And that we're coming from such a place of deficit, and I go back to this, when they turned us loose, no money, no land, no house, no education. It was such a place of deficit. And yet, in spite of that, our people came together. We built houses for each other. We set up corporations. In Jamaica, the ex started trading with an American company. They had like a little co-op that they would come together with their produce, bananas and things like that, and started selling it to the ships on the port. And when these former slave owners recognized that these people are really making money, they're free now, you can't stop them, they made laws to shut down so many of the things that our people were doing. We've really been coming from a very steep uphill climb, and we need to take pride in what we have done and how much we have achieved. Acceptance of self. We're a wonderful, phenomenal people. I doubt that any other race would have gone through what we have gone through and are still standing. Education was kept from us for centuries. And yet, as soon as we started being educated in the Caribbean, right now, we have 4 Nobel um, Prize winners, 2 from St. Lucia, 1 from Trinidad, and I can't remember where the other one is from. I think St. Kitts. So from a place of not being educated at all, in the short space of 100, we've got 4 Nobel Prize winners. Does not that say something about us, who we are, and our resilience? We need to create equity for African Caribbean people. We need better racial relationships in our community. We need to educate the other races as to who we are without violence. We need to start a conversation with them so that they can start seeing us as who we really are and accepting us people and not as the animal that Edward Long had described us to be, that we are like the beast, we are different from the other species of humankind. That is just so painful to read. And if we start having better education, we start having reduced crime rate. And then, just think of the financial benefits of keeping our young people out of prison. As I said at the beginning, when they're in prison, they're at their most productive time of life. If we can keep them out of prison in those productive years, so instead of being in prison, wasting their mind, they'll be outside creating careers, establishing a family, establishing financial security for themselves. And it can be done. It can be done. Our young people are capable of doing it. They just need our support. And as I said, I'm a nurse. And in nursing, we have what we call the 5 rights. Before you can give a patient any medication, you need to make sure that you're giving the medication to the right patient to prevent medical error. So you need to know that you've got the right patient, then you need to know you've got the right medication. Not only does it have to be the right medication, it has to be the right dose. After you've established that, you need to know the right route. Are you going to give this medication by mouth, by IV injection, or whatever other route you're going to give it? Because if you give the medication by the wrong route, you can create serious medical harm to that patient. And it has to be the right time. You cannot give a patient a medication at 9 a.m. in the morning that is meant for 9 p.m. at night. So we have the 5 rights. And then pursuit of happiness, I think they've got the 5 rights. And I'm challenging pursuit of happiness to create this change that I've been talking about. They've got the right attitude, the right heart, they've got the right information, they've got the right leaders, they've got the right atmosphere. They've created a group of people. And if we think of it, with the group of people who attend the pursuit of happiness meetings, if we all come together and attempted to create a positive atmosphere for our young people, look at all the things that are negative in our community and try to find solutions, because nobody else can do it but us. They can give us all the funding they need, they can do whatever, but until we in our hearts and our minds determine that we are going to make a change, and until we decide what change is going to be, it is not going to change for us. We need to change the narrative. We need to love ourselves. We need to have pride in ourselves. We need to respect ourselves. We need to learn more about the world around us so we can make informed decisions. And here's the biggie. We need to get financial education, because you get the money in one hand. If you're not financially educated, it's going to go right back out to the person you got it from in the first place. We need to be able to trust ourselves, and we need to create an umbrella for our children. And it has to be run by us with positive projects that includes the entire community. There's a part for all of us to play, and it's time we started playing it. The time is now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Yvonne. That was a really thought-provoking presentation, and I really appreciate the time and energy you've put into that. We really appreciate a pursuit of happiness, so thank you.
Okay. Thank you for having me.